This week on Dig Me Out.
Satellite, flying high, hello. Keep it cool, break the rules, fake your life, you know.
With your hosts, Jason Ziak and Tim Minichi.
Jay, we're back again with another episode thanks to our Dig Me Out Union on Patreon. You can help us make the next episode happen by joining us at dmounion.com or digmeoutunion.com. And speaking of the union, Jay, I believe we have a new union member. He goes by the name of Andrew Hammond. Welcome to the union, Andrew. And I believe he has joined us over at Discord. Is it Captain George Hamilton? Is that the name I'm thinking of? I'm assuming that they're connected. I assume when one person joins the union and then a new person pops into the Discord, that they're somehow related.
Right. Could be.
George Hamilton III, not Captain George Hamilton. George Hamilton III is the name. It's hard to. I like it when people use their names. I'm not gonna like inflict some sort of like rule where you have to use your name, but it's hard to keep track of people when they start going with crazy names.
We believe in being double masked. So you could join Patreon with one name and then come over to Discord with a different name.
I feel like there should be a parentheses, also known as. Joining us this week, one of our patrons. He's been here before. He's back again. Welcome, Jeff Gentis.
Hi guys, how's it going?
Good. You were here last year in the year of COVID, the first year of COVID year one. What was your pick then?
I sat in on the round table for 1991, the albums of 1991.
Oh, the 91. Okay. So you didn't, this is your first pick?
This is my first pick.
Okay.
I've been jacked up for, I'm going to say a full 12 months.
I remember that you were on, but I thought it was for a pick. But no, this is great. This is you're tearing off the Band-Aid, getting the first pick out there. You'll have, now another year to contemplate. You can put together a spreadsheet. You can start a 64 team tournament, trying to figure it out.
Done and done.
I know lots of people have different methods for picking their albums. So, without further ado, why don't you share with the listeners your pick for this episode?
So today we're going to be discussing Brian Jonestown Massacre, Give It Back. That is their sixth studio album. Came out in 1997. It featured prominently in the documentary Dig about Brian Jonestown Massacre and the Dandy Warhols. And for me, I think it's the best summation of what they're all about. And I guess we'll hear from you guys as to what they're all about is any good.
Well, and we have talked about the Dandy Warhols. It was a long time ago. It was like year 2 that we talked about the Dandy Warhols. But it's nice. We'll get into it, but there's a nice crossover between the record that we talked about, which was the Dandy Warhols Come Down, that came out in 1997, same as this year, or same as this record. But that was March of 2012, episode 67. Talk some dandies.
Wow. Within the first 100.
And we'll get into it, but this album even has, I would call it a response song to one of the
Yes,
dandies.
It does. So how'd you get into Brian Jonestown Massacre?
Purely from the documentary. I had a track from a sampler. It was off the 2003 album. And it was one of those things where it's like, when you get a bunch of samplers and you try to put the artists together, I kind of put them in a playlist, and then you go back after a couple of years and you're like, hey, this song, maybe that's worth actually pursuing, this artist's like full blown album and whatnot. I hadn't gotten to that point yet with them. I just saw the documentary, and even though it's not a way to sell someone on them being great people, I liked what I heard. And from there, I think I bought still a little basic then. Still in my mid 20s. I bought the best of. Really like that. And then after a while, just started getting into, especially their pre 2008 discography. And I've kept up with it since, though, once they fell off eMusic, which used to be a way that I'd get new music, I stopped listening to them as well. But that was it. I've seen them 3 times, and just love them.
So I feel like I also got in, or I was aware of the name, but the first time I actually heard them was the documentary. I also feel like the follow-up record, Strung Out in Heaven, which came out in '98, I instantly know that album cover. I don't know if it got pushed more, because it was on TBT, and this is also the time then Guided by Voice was on TBT. But I just remember seeing that around record stores, and I don't know if I listened to it at the time, but I definitely remember seeing the documentary. We might have even gone to the theater to see it. Jay, you've seen the documentary, right?
I have. I don't remember where I saw it.
I feel like we might have gone to like the theater in Bexley that showed like art films and documentaries to go see it, because that was where I saw like the Wilco documentary, and that's where I saw a bunch of music documentaries there, because that place it's like one of those like little one-off arty places that shows stuff like that. It's
on Amazon Prime now.
Yep.
Because I gave it a rewatch and prep for this to try to rekindle the old magic.
And a lot of that is, if I remember correctly, is about this record. It's them. It's not like they show the full songs, but there's like snippets of songs from this record. I think they're in the studio making.
Yeah. And it's not like, right. It's not like about the making of the album, though.
Right.
The album is, if you know what you're looking for, you're like, oh yeah, this is kind of in the center of the film. One way or another.
It's more about the relationship between the two bands, the Dandy Warhols and Brian Jonestown Massacre, which neither of the bands involved seem to have very nice things to say about the documentary afterwards.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Just that that the filmmaker needed a narrative, and they created one out of the footage.
Right.
And that it's not necessarily representative of their relationship. Anywho.
Yeah.
So this record came out October 7th, 1997 on Bomp Records. Had you listened to this record, Jay? Had you ever heard it before?
No, I was only familiar with the band from the movie.
Gotcha. Same as me. So for this record, the lineup is Anton Newcomb on vocals, guitar, bass, drums, keyboards, and sitar. Matt Hollywood on bass, vocals, and guitar. And if I understand correctly, like that's basically the songwriting duo for the band.
Right.
It used to be a split a bit more, but it seems like Anton did more of the songwriting on this one. I think the only song that Matt Hollywood wrote was track 9, Not If You Were the Last Dandy on Earth.
Right.
But did contribute other parts.
Yeah, we'll get into it, but I mean, it's just funny that he's the one who wrote that track.
Right. So we have Jeff Davies on guitar, Peter Hayes on guitar, Joel Gian on percussion, Miranda Richards on vocals and guitar, Jussie Tegelman on drums, Adam Hamilton on drums, and Ragust on flute. I don't know who Ragust is, but it looks like August, but it starts with an R. But Ragust doesn't sound right. It's guy has to have more flair.
Yeah,
it has to be Ragust,
especially for a flutist.
Yeah, exactly.
The flutist or flautist?
Oh
yeah, it's a flautist.
Oh, you're right.
Is it?
Yeah, you're right.
That just sounded right in my head. I don't even know for sure.
No, you're right.
Good job, Jay. The flautist.
Sometimes things just fall out of my head.
It's just in there and it tumbles out at the right moment.
Yeah, you're like, This sounds right. I'll say it. I don't know
Nice
where I
job.
have that information from, but it's in there.
So we did not get any comments over at Patreon. People were scared. They were intimidated by this record, and they decided they voted, but they did not leave any comments. They were waiting. They want to hear what we have to say and what Jeff has to say about this record. So just a little bit of overall history about this, and then we'll get into the record.
History of the band.
Formed in San Francisco in the early 90s. There's like a wide swath of when they actually formed. It says between 90 and 93, which kind of leaves it open. It's a wide area for when they've actually formed there. And there's been quite a few people in the band. This is like we're getting into 80s metal territory with the number of people who have been in different lineups, played on different records. Looks like it's been Anton and Matt at the beginning, and then Matt drops out at a certain point, and at a certain point Rob Campanella joins as sort of a permanent member, doing sort of odd instruments here and there, organs, piano, mandolins. And Frankie Teardrop Emerson was in the band for quite a while, not in the last 5 or 6 years, but throughout the 2000s. So a lot of people in and out of this band. Peter Hayes, who founded the Black Rebel Motorcycle Club, he was in this band for a while. So,
and Joel Gian, the percussionist / tambourinist, he's been pretty consistent, and he's one of the people pictured on the album cover and takes center stage during their concerts
as the tambourinist.
Yeah.
Okay.
Listen, I've never seen a better one.
Ian Astbury shakes a pretty good tambourine. I gotta say,
on the hip now, baby.
On the hip, yeah, exactly. I you know how there's like air guitar competitions? I want a tambourine world competition with guys like Joel Gian and Ian Astbury. Show me your tambourine moves. Yeah, tambourinists. So that's about all I want to cover here. I want to get into this record because there's quite a bit to cover on this record. Jay, tell me one thing you liked about "Give It Back!" by the Brian Jonestown Massacre.
It's a bit of a trip through the 60s. I felt like I was hearing a variety of different 60s pop influences. And some of them surprised me. I guess I expected, obviously the Rolling Stones, the Brian Jones era, obviously, to come through. And you hear that on, is it Malala? But I didn't expect things like the Byrds. So the second track, "This Is Why You Love Me," it sounds like a Laurel Canyon, Rickenbacker, 60s psychedelic pop song with maybe like Ray Davies singing.
So dry your eyes, I'll never lie, I'll hurt you like he did. Hey, come out and play. He never did nothing except to drag you down. You can rest your head, 'cause we'll be laying around, and I'm here to say that there's no way he loves you like I do. Hey.
And it's a well-written song. It's got a great melody. I love how the guitar and the vocal are really sharp and locked up. It's concise. So that surprised me, and you get little gems like that through the record, that explore some different sounds as well. So whoever you are, you get more into like this rolling bassline heavy song, which a lot of the other tracks tend to be like more sitar or acoustic guitar or beds of like guitar organ. So that's a nice little surprise that pops, and the bass line takes center stage and has a bit of a Britpop feel, and that kind of took me to, between that and Sue, there's this moment of the record where you get the Jesus and Mary chain influence and maybe some British influence that, early in the record, it's maybe sounding more 60s American, or Rolling Stones interpreting, American music. And then the album ends with, something that's very poppy and bright sounding, almost Beach Boys like, with, I guess it's the bonus track originally, but it's listed on the full record now.
What's that?
What's that?
What song what's the ending song?
It's Summer.
Oh, I don't have that.
Oh, okay.
I have MP3s from way back. From downloaded somewhere. And this one ends with their Satanic Majesties Second Request. So I didn't hear that song.
Yeah, it's on the streaming. They tack it on.
Okay.
It says bonus track, which makes for an interesting like journey to the end, because the album gets a bit experimental, and all of a sudden it pops with this this final track / bonus track that is very bouncy and very Beach Boys like. So it's an interesting trip through a lot of different interpretations of, I think, mostly 60s influences. It's, I think, presented with a bit of a garage kind of attitude. None of the performances here are like, mind-blowing musicianship or vocals, but it's done with I think an authentic kind of, like I said, garage kind of spirit to it. It sounds not overwrought, sounds fairly fresh, and like a band that's maybe rehearsed these a bit and is getting them down on tape, not like overly polished or pristine, which I think brings some character to it too, in that it doesn't get too, I think with the layering on some of this stuff, it could get very kind of artificial sounding. And I think they do a pretty good job of keeping it feeling, real and honest, and, a bit raw. So that's some of the stuff that I liked on it. What about you, Tim?
Well, I think this record at the start, through the first maybe like 7-9 tracks, is just really strong in its interpretation and homage to 60s psychedelia. The obvious one is the Stones during the Brian Jones era, which you mentioned. But there's a lot of interesting stuff going on that isn't just Stones. You mentioned like the Byrds and some of that kind of stuff. I found when they were a little bit more bass driven, when it had a groove, like Whoever You Are, that bass riff that starts out Whoever You Are, I mean, that could have been off a Verve album in the 90s. So I was hearing connections to, you listen to this and you go, oh, they're just doing a Stones ripoff kind of thing. But when you start to like think about what was happening in the 90s with regards to bands dipping back into psychedelia and what would become actually neo psychedelia, I could hear their contemporaries who were off doing different things like the Verb. I mean, there's some elements that reminded me of the Stone Roses. There's things that bands afterwards that I'm sure were influenced by this band, like the Black Angels, or who was the other one I was thinking of that kind of had this kind of feel. But just I think I the first couple listens I was a little bit like not overwhelmed, underwhelmed, I guess is the word. The opposite of over is under. And then it started to click with me like, oh, okay, I get where this fits in. I mean, and I know that Anton Newcomb is like really kind of a character and is a very unique individual. Hearing all that he and Matt Hollywood do in terms of like layering guitars and layering sounds. What's interesting is there are certain songs where I don't necessarily love what they're doing vocally, or sometimes not even a vocal really, but the music to me is so interesting, and they find like the right groove, which is what I think is so hard for sometimes for bands, is that they just can't find the right vibe, and they absolutely nail the right vibe, and it sounds good, which I was worried that, you know, a lot of the album covers for Brian Jonestown Massacre look like local band covers. So I was a little bit worried about the fidelity of the record. But this says tangible, what does it say on the cover? Tangible quality stereo or something like that. In red, yellow, and blue.
It's so like small and squishy, I can't even read it.
Right. What does it say? Tangible custom stereo. Sorry. I don't even know what that means. What is tangible means? You can touch it. How do I touch this? But neither here nor there. I think that they cover a lot of interesting ground, both reinterpreting and creating new sounds. And I think this works in a lot of ways as a record that I know that there was a push, you know, get them on TVT, have a single probably at that point. But this works well for me to just put it on and to just let it play and not worry about where I'm at any particular point. So there was a lot of stuff that worked. I mean, there's so many elements you can pull out. You can hear a little bit of Velvet Underground. You can hear a little bit of this, a little bit of that. But I think the songwriting is strong enough on this that it doesn't matter that there's some obvious touchstones that they kind of make it their own, which makes it interesting. So what works best for you, Jeff?
I really like the sequencing. There's a nice degree of variation. It does help with the bonus track. Is a good one. So I'd recommend that on Spotify. I think they also, in addition to everything you guys covered, like 96% of it. But there's also just layers of shoegaze, especially their earlier albums were, I mean, you know, there's one called Method Drone, which is like droney kind of shoegaze, right? And it's a little bit like, you know, they've something like the song Sue is like borders onto, I think, shoegaze, and it sounds, you know, with a little bit of like what Wooden Ships sound like too, albeit without the like full blown I don't know, stoned groove that some of the Wooden Ship songs have. You know, that Whoever You Are track, I think that's the one I would say to somebody, okay, if you like this track, you will like this band. It's not their best, but it's the most like emblematic. I mean, to the extent that a band with, you know, 300 songs to their name is has a singular touchstone song. But yeah, everything else, it just seems like, it's almost like they throw their influences out there with their name. And the first few times you're like, okay, well, this is great. We're, you know, the first track is Supersonic. They're going to India, you know, they're going to do the Beatles and Stones mid-60s thing here, but they just update it. and they do layer so much else that, and in particular, I think is one of their more consistent efforts, and one of the most varied.
This song is about you, and my life now without you, and my reasons just for living and forgiving the unknown. All alone. If you do it well, you better do it right. If you're screwed up, well, you better screw it tight. It's the way that you're living, I'm forgetting what I know.
Well, I thought Satellite to me, when I heard that, and then I found out that Peter Hayes, who was in Black Rebel Motorcycle Club, was on this record, I was like, well, he basically created that band out of that song. Like, that's what Black Rebel Motorcycle Club sounds like on their, like, their first couple records is that sound. And that's not easy to get. I mean, that's that sort of jangle and that rhythm and all the factors in a song like that are not, you have to be able to play to get that vibe. And correct me if I'm wrong, but they recorded this pretty quickly. Like, this was done over like
over
a weekend. Yeah.
Give or take one or two tracks, but yeah, I mean, and for what it's worth, just for other folks to have a touchdown, my favorite, I agree on the Black Rebel Motorcycle Club, and my favorite album is to Take Them On Your Own. And so his contributions on this, on one hand, it's hard to know unless you know it's him. But once you do, yeah, it does make a lot of sense. I also think there's just like a degree of, notwithstanding how Anton is in the documentary, there's elements of them not taking themselves seriously. The song number one hit Jam, I just feel like is this just straight up, it's an irony play. But yet you're, with a few listens, you're like, I'm just going to ignore what they're doing lyrically here and just sit back with it. Well,
and in terms of not taking themselves seriously, we have to touch on Not If You Were the Last Dandy on Earth, which is a direct response to Not If You Were the Last Junkie on Earth, which came out the same year, which is funny, but essentially the Not If You Were the Last Junkie on Earth is about Anton Newcomb, and then this is their response to that, but not in a very, it's more of a playful way. From what I've read, it's not necessarily like, it's not a diss track. This isn't like a hip hop war between these two bands. But you can get that like lighthearted vibe from that and some of the other stuff where they mess around a little bit. You mentioned about the sequencing. So because I didn't have that last bonus song, I did feel like the end of the record got a little like in the mud.
Sure.
Because you got The Devil May Care, Mom and Dad Don't, and then their Satanic Majesties Second Request, which ends with, I really like the music that's in that. It's got this cool like throbbing bass thing that's going on, but it's another Jim Jones quote. And we just had Jim Jones. Jim Jones has been on the show now twice in the last 3 weeks.
He's like a guest host.
It's a little unnerving, to be quite honest, because I don't know if anybody knows this, but Jim Jones was a mass murderer, not a good dude. And this is the second band in 3 weeks that has included audio.
He's the Jonestown Massacre part of the name.
Yeah. So I really hope because that happened in the late 70s and these bands were in the 90s. I really hope in 20 years from now, there aren't a bunch of bands throwing on certain president's quotes to be funny or ironic or what have you, because it's going to make it difficult when my daughter's like in her early 20s and listening to pop music and rock music, and I'm going to be like, God damn it.
I can tell you one of my finalists was the Concrete Blonde Mexican Moon album that includes the song Jonestown too. So it was going to come.
Oh yeah. I looked it up. There are a ton. I mean, up to like last year, Post Malone had a song that was about Jim Jones. Like dozens of songs over the last 25, 30 years that reference Jim Jones or Jonestown or what have you. I'm like, come on, people.
Obviously, you're drinking the Kool-Aid, right?
It wasn't Kool-Aid, though. It was Flavor-Aid. That's what people get wrong. They didn't use Kool-Aid.
So when you use the expression, you say you've been drinking the Flavor-Aid?
That's what you're supposed to say. They didn't use Kool-Aid.
But to your point, that's become just part of our vernacular that everybody
Right.
uses. And it goes back to this horrific incident.
Yep.
That obviously pop culture is obsessed with.
Yeah, it's very strange. I don't understand it, to be quite honest. But what didn't work for you on the record, Jay?
You started to touch on it. The end of the record, like I said earlier, I'm glad it ends on this It's Summer, the bonus track now. The Devil May Care and Satanic Majesties to me are just too droning and indulgent. As a passive listen, it's fine, but when I'm kind of paying attention, it's a bit much. I also don't love, there's some moments like you guys were talking about Satellite, which I like the idea of that song, but it's just a little too rough from a performance standpoint for me. I just wish it was a little sharper, especially when you come out of This Is Why You Love Me, which is very sharp sounding, and Together. There's just a lot of like those two guitar parts are just so off and loose that I just find myself it starts to feel amateurish, just in terms of the performance in that song. And you mentioned Black Rover Motorcycle Club. I can't help but then think about the mid to later version of that band doing that song and how it would be like sharpened up and
on the Howl record or something like that.
Yeah, just a lot more together. You Better Love Me Before I'm Gone is another one. Like these wailing two harmonicas that are kind of off key. It gets a bit painful. I like the female voice in that, but then when they come in and do the harmonies, they're awful. So there's just some, I think, performance stuff that is real loose. And I mean, I kind of get it from that standpoint, but it just makes for a difficult listen. Number one hit jam, again, not spectacular. So there's some down parts in this record that, pull my attention and kind of, make it more difficult than it probably should be. I think when this album works well, it feels spontaneous and fun and, on point, and you get to cover some ground, but it doesn't like go off the rails and when it starts to go off the rails too much, into self-indulgence or just weirdness or just rough performances, it starts to lose me.
I agree with you on some of the out-of-tune, too much noodling. Like Servo has it as well. I like that song. Yeah. But like with Satellite, there's like the guitar just doesn't stop. Yeah. There's the second guitar, which I'm guessing maybe is Matt Hollywood. I'm not sure. But it just kind of goes on and on and on.
Same thing with the flute in that song. It's like, okay, flute guy, take a break. Take a breath, flautist.
With Michael of everyone but this, I am the last of the natural ones alive. Let yourself go and have some fun, little one.
editing on the flout.
So yeah, there's a little bit of overindulgence in where I think maybe if you had not recorded this over a weekend, maybe, and I don't know how much time they spent working up the material before this, or if they literally wrote it while they were, if they just had like parts and then they put it together in a studio and recorded it. I'm not sure what the process is there, but I wish there was like a little bit of editing on some of the tracks, because I feel like at the core, like Satellite and Servo, stuff like that, there's a good song there. It just needed to be reined in just a little bit, because I don't know that Anton has the kill your darlings sort of mentality where he's going to be like, maybe we overdid it with this nonstop noodling guitar for 3 minutes. Maybe we could cut that back just a little bit. And I agree with you. Like, number one hit jam. I like how with Salaam, you just get like 1:40. Like, okay, that's a cool little interlude. Like, do that length with number one hit jam or The Devil May Care, stuff like that. Like, keep those. If you're going to experiment, that's cool, but I don't need it for 4.5, 6 minutes.
Yeah.
Like that's a lot to me. Because I feel like this is a band that's made for vinyl records, and this record is like the original cut is 55 minutes. And if you're telling me there's another song that's going to put it closer to 60 minutes, so now you're looking at like a double vinyl, and I don't need a double vinyl from this band. I need like a tight 44-minute long record, because I feel like that's like, this sounds like a band that I want to hear the crackle of the vinyl as I'm playing it. Like they're made for that.
Well, and that's the music they're paying homage to, too. I mean, it's
right.
Most of these bands we talked about wrote pretty sharp pop songs, and if they indulged, it was rare and, on a record or for a song occasionally. So it's a little weird to hear like an homage to that style of music, but then hear it kind of meander and go all over the place for a long time.
Right. Like, I'm thinking back to, I need to double check, but if I got a lot of Exile on Main Street with this. And if I go look back, a lot of these songs are 2:20, 2:59, 3:30. There's a couple of 4-minute songs, but like 2:36. A lot of tight songs. There's 1 minute. Let It Loose is the only one that's over 5 minutes. Everything else is basically 4 minutes or less, and a lot of them are under 3 minutes. I mean, if you can give me Tumbling Dice in 3:45, and then also Sweet Black Angel or in 2:54, or there's a lot, because there's a lot of like really stripped down blues country on that record, because it's a double album. I feel like that this record, Give It Back, would have benefited just a little bit. Is there anything that doesn't work for you, Jeff, on this record, or things that you would adjust?
Yeah, I think it's, for me, I mean, there's Satanic Majesties Second Request. It's fine to listen to once, but I don't need the Jim Jones audio bed. It's just it's hard to ignore.
Right.
And for me, I'm just somebody who doesn't, who really, I do my own stripping away of albums, artists be damned. So Salaam, I'm just not an instrumental person. So I'd pull that out. So I hadn't been listening to that till preparing for this episode. Jay mentioned the Birds tie into track 2. I really like that song, This Is Why You Love Me. And my wife, who's putting her own focus on to start singing, like whether or not she's, using this as a reason to figure out whether she should care about this band. And she watched the documentary with me recently. She just said, "Oh, this is just, I feel a whole lot better." And I was like, oh, damn it, you're right.
Wow.
So, she made it a little worse. I think there's a couple other things, like, I don't know, not to argue against straw men, but, there's the notion of like, he's from San Francisco. He affects a fake British accent for a lot of his singing. I'm just like, it bothers some folks. For me, it's like, I don't mind. And then there's the folks where it's like, there's always a question of like, are you wearing your influences too much on your sleeve, or, the fact that we can recognize where you're, what you're drawing from. How does that cut? And, it depends. I feel like it depends on, I find it hard to separate from how you feel about the band itself, whether or not you're going to blame them for being too influenced or too derivative in a sense. It doesn't happen for bands, I feel like, who are, like how many different British bands are pulling from Joy Division or Gang of Four.
Right.
And you don't hear, you're like, oh, I could get into the Editors, but for like, do I need another Ian Curtis voice? Just like people you don't really hear that. I think it's one of those things where like, this is just a good rock band. And this is what, good rock sounds like. And yeah, a lot of the good rock was done in the 60s, and people are, building on it and adding to it, I think. Anyway, that's at least those are not critiques you made, but
right.
Critiques I've heard.
Right. And I totally get that. And I think maybe I would have been more skeptical in the 90s, but I've waned on worrying about whether bands are showing their influence too much. I mean, look at the Black Crowes. The Black Crowes have definitely strong influences, but they were able to turn it into something really interesting and unique, even though you can draw that back definitely to particular bands. I don't think it matters as much because, a lot, you talk about the 60s. I mean, that's really like the second decade of rock and roll. And there's at a certain point, the 70s did happen, 80s, like there's going to be some homage, and eventually like things are going to start churning where you're going to take stuff that happened and start repurposing it in a different way. So to me, like, yeah, I hear certain bands and certain sounds, but it's no different than, you can hear what Oasis is doing, and you can hear definite rips of certain Beatles songs and stuff like that. I mean, it's like, it's kind of pointless after a while, or else you can't, yes, you can reinvent the wheel a little bit. You can try, but there's always going to be bands that are pulled towards certain sounds and trying to reinterpret them. And it's just part of rock and roll. I think it's just, there's ebbs and flows.
Yeah. I mean, this band being, I guess, derivative, and it doesn't bother me. And I'm with you. Like, I don't know, if you like music, and you start getting yourself all wound up about like who's derivative of who, you're going to quickly suck all the joy out of music.
Right.
Like, just like it or don't. And you can have reasons for it, but like, don't not like something because it sounds like somebody else. That it just seems silly to me. Like, so that part didn't bother me. I'd actually, I think my critique is more like it. I maybe want them to be more derivative. Like, if you're going to do this music, like,
well, yeah, I mean,
kind of do it with the craft. Maybe that's what I'm saying. The craft of the Rolling Stones and the craft of the Byrds. I would love to hear that.
Well, think about like this, when the Stones recorded, they had like the Johns brothers, Glenn Johns and Andy Johns in there, recording. I mean, they sat down and like got players and got guys like Nicky Hopkins and Ian Stewart and those types of folks. So and I get that this is made in a different universe. I mean, this is an indie, sound, which is actually, in some ways amazing that this is basically a big collective. I mean, there's like 10 people in this band, that they're able to pull this together. I think I read, or maybe I was listening to, I know what it was. I was listening to the classical channel, because that's what I listen to now when I'm in the car. And there was a classical version of Norwegian Wood by the Beatles. And the person who was introducing the song said that the year that single was released, more sitars were sold in the United States than in India. Now, there's a lot of people in
Amazing.
India
Yeah.
in whatever 1967, 68. So the fact that the few 250 million or whatever it was back then bought more sitars. I don't even know how you get a sitar in 1968 in the United States, but we bought them all
Wow.
That's
because we
true.
heard Norwegian wood.
There's probably only one place in town to buy a guitar. Where would you buy a sitar?
Exactly. It's not like you go on Amazon in 1968 and order up a sitar.
Right.
Like, where are they getting? Some dude saw that coming and was
Yeah.
like, I am going to buy up all the sitars and ship them
Wow.
over the United States because I want to make bank.
Just controlling the supply chain of sitars.
Yeah, exactly. So let's talk about, so this comes out in 97. I know the Dandies got some play in 97 because of Not Last Junkie on Earth. That was definitely an MTV video. And I feel, and maybe it was, and then they got another one. Bohemian Like You was the other one where I feel like they got some MTV play and radio play.
Yeah.
I don't feel like Brian Jonestown ever got to that level with regards to singles. So it's not surprising they've sort of remained an underground band. I also think the name doesn't help, to be honest. You know, if you're going to go from, in 1997, from the Foo Fighters to the latest by Dog's Eye View or whatever, and then, the Brian Jonestown Massacre. I don't know that radio programmers would be jumping on that in mainstream. College radio's all over it. They're playing all these records. But I don't know that mainstream radio wants to take a chance on this. I mean,
yes.
John Cougar Concentration Camp didn't get any airplay, so.
Yeah, the name does not help. The Dandy Warhols just have a little more polish too. The vocals are a little tighter and just the production's better. The singer's a good looking guy. That probably didn't hurt either. For them.
Courtney Taylor.
Us. So you can kind of see, what the difference here from a pop standpoint pretty clearly.
His face is like molded from some sort of Greek god, I don't know, statue. Like, have you ever looked at him? It's terrifying how good looking that man is. It's like it's just like this jawline of this chiseled jawline. It's kind of like what Evan Dando looked like before whatever happened to him.
No, that's a good call. It's the same thing. You got the cheekbones, and then they cut back in to somehow it's strong jaw. It's too much.
It's unnerving.
It's not fair.
No, it's not fair. I got a head like a eggplant. Seriously, I look like Joe Pesci's offspring with
It's also, I mean, I was just going to say that it's also just a level of self-sabotage that, it took all of, the A&R guy at TVT to get them signed to that label, and they weren't doing themselves any favors. I can't imagine I don't hear a single going well either with this band. So,
right.
Yeah.
They're not going to be like, oh yeah, let us go back and fix that for you.
We'll polish it up and
yeah. I mean, it's like, why weren't they bigger? It really is like they didn't want to be.
Yeah.
In some sense. And I'm not saying in like some kind of like glorified, they don't want to be a sellout way. They just think, and it might've been like a little bit of a vulnerability, a fear of being exposed and trying to just, ensure that you never get to that level.
Yeah. And there is this is the 90s. So there was still like this anti-sellout mentality as well.
Yeah.
You mentioned something, Jeff, that you're making me think of too. You mentioned that there's moments in this record where they don't take themselves seriously, and there's a bit of tension there, I think, for bands that like have that as part of who they are, then struggle with success means I'm taking myself seriously. So it's like there's this not wanting to give into that, which
Totally.
makes them who they are, but also sabotages them in some ways of ever being like commercially successful. But it sounds like they've stayed together and continue to tour and put records out for a while, right?
Yeah, and Anton cleaned up, and they seem to have had some overall maturity with age, and they still crank out there. I think that they've sort of built up some popularity overseas. And when I've seen them at, Bowery, not Bowery Ballroom, Webster Hall, Terminal 5 in New York, places that, by comparison's sake, I've seen Japan Droids in the National at some of these places. So, there's decent side crowds. There's also the random note. These are large dudes. They're all like got to be 6 foot or above. It's kind of a funny part of the collective, I guess, but it's just a funny look. They have, 4 or 5 guitars. Some guy that sometimes there's a guy playing organ who then, picks up a guitar as well, which, kind of makes you think. I mean, you guys have more of the being in a band experience than I do, but it's like, what makes you go from 3 guitars to 4? Like, what's that trigger? It's a little bit like if you look at a guy who's got 8 gold rings.
Yeah.
And you're like, what? I'm not interested. Obviously 7 to 8, you got to complete the set. But I want to know, when you went from 4 to 5, what was the thought process there? And with this band, I can only think it was like a drug connect to figure out as to why they go from 3 to 4 guitars.
I don't know how you get to 3. So 4 is like,
yeah.
I don't know. We got to ask Dave Grohl because they have 3 guitar players and I can't figure out why. You mentioned, I mean, they pretty much put out a record. There was a break between 2003 and 2008 where they didn't have any records out. But they've had a record out basically every year up until 2019. And I believe from what I read, Antoine Newcomb lives in Germany now with his family. He's got like 2 kids, and you mentioned about him getting like sort of cleaned up. It seems to be on a, positive tip now. And there's a lot to cover with this in terms of if you want to get into this band. There's a lot of material. I just think that their album titles, I mean, you got the 2008 album My Bloody Underground, and then 2010's Who Killed Sergeant Pepper, and Thank God for Mental Illness from 1996, and some EPs like mini album Thingy Wingy. Just Fistful of Bees. That sounds like a Guided by Voices song.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
That would be like 30 seconds and it'd be amazing. Let's get into our overall ratings for this record. Worthy album, better EP, and decent single. Where are you at, Jay?
I have a 7-song EP. So Supersonic. This Is Why You Love Me, Malela, Whoever You Are, Sue, Servo, and It's Summer. I think that hits for me like the more tighter song oriented stuff. You get a little bit of the Britpop modern feel. You could cover the 60s from the Kinks, the Byrds, the Rolling Stones to the Beach Boys. You sort of hit on, what this band does best. So that's where I'm at.
I'm at a 9-song album. I would take all your tracks and I would also add Not If You Were the Last Dandy on Earth. And I would have my midpoint be Salaam. And I think that would be an interesting 9-song album.
Hold on a second. Not If You're the Last Dandy on Earth is not on the streaming version.
It's not?
What track is that?
Track 9.
No, track 9 for me is number 1 hit jam.
No.
What? Oh, there was a 13-track version on Spotify and a 14-track.
I'm listening to the 13-track version.
Hurry up, go listen to the song.
All right, yeah. We're gonna.
What the heck? Why would they take that song off?
I don't know why they would take that song off. That's weird. That's like a center point of the album. But then I also didn't get It's Summer, so because I have the like on MP3 from way back when. So
I can talk you into a tight 246-minute song for Not If You're Last Dandy on Earth, Jay.
That could that would bump you to 8 songs.
I think that's a 70s album.
That's
I'm just
4
trying to
songs per side.
I'm just trying to dig through their catalog here and see if I can find it.
It's like legitimately the most rocking song on the record. And you
Well,
didn't.
if you stream it today on Spotify or Apple Music, you're not going to hear it.
That's weird, huh?
Yeah, because I
Let me
thought there were
see.
2 versions when I looked for this on Spotify, because I had to pull out the 2 tracks I don't listen to. Spoiler
Let's
alert.
see. So, yeah, sometimes at the bottom, it's so dumb. If you go to Spotify and you click on an album, there's a thing at the bottom that says like there's like an option to go to another version. Yeah, I see what you're saying. Like, I didn't check this on Spotify because I had the MP3s, but it's a 13-track album on Spotify, which is what I have, 13 tracks. But there's not If You Were the Last Dandy on Earth. It's Summer. So I wonder why they swapped those songs out. In and out. Maybe they felt bad now, finally, about writing about
It's the
the
first thing
Dandies.
that came in my head when you told me the history of the song, like what it's referencing, that if it's not on there anymore, that maybe that had something to do with it.
There's, yeah, I don't know if you can see, but it's like the full picture without the sort of red, yellow, blue writing. That version on
Oh.
Spotify is the 14
It's
tracker.
a different album cover.
It's like that same picture,
Yeah.
and the other one is just narrowed and minimized and kind of distorted. But I don't know why there's 2 different versions of the album and 2 different covers and a weird track switch.
I don't see that. Like, I'm looking at Spotify right now. This is very exciting for our listeners to know that we're all looking on Spotify right now.
So I would recommend to your listeners that you look for the one where the picture is the full frame of the album.
Is the band name like different, or is there any little detail like that makes it different from a cataloging standpoint?
I don't think so. I mean, well, it's interesting. One of them says it's a 2008 version and the other's 1997. I wonder if there was a remastering, but then it still doesn't explain why they took out the one track that was the single.
Yeah.
I don't understand. All right. Well, as we have encountered before, the wonders of Spotify have created a conundrum.
Sometimes when you dig these bodies up, you don't find all the bones. There's a tibia missing.
Yeah, seriously. How'd they get around without that tibia? Where do you land, Jeff?
I'm at the Worthy album. 12 of the 14 work for me. I skip Salaam, the instrumental, and then their Satanic Majesties Second Request. And that type of batting average is pretty solid for them. They're usually above 500. And for this album, I felt like when I was trying to pick which one of the 90s, I'm like, this is basically my favorite band. And trying to figure out which one of the 90s would I want to introduce people to. I think this one, because it is a good summary of everything, is the way to go. And it's also just track for track. I think they hardly miss. For folks the earlier albums are better for it, but if they keep going, Stuck in Heaven, and my favorite is the 2001, the Bravery, Repetition, and Noise. And again, it's varied, but it's very solid start to finish. And if you keep going, you're going to hit some little bit of electronic experimenting, some rock still mixed in, and it's varied. It's just not nearly at this level of, it's like they're building on what they built, as opposed to just, kind of reinterpreting the 60s. And the reinterpreting the 60s is my favorite era.
Well, our patrons were split 50-50 between Worthy Album and Better EP. So, half sided with you, Jay, and half sided with me and Jeff. But we'll never know if Jay will upgrade his EP to an album, because he'll never be able to hear that one song.
I found it. It's on a singles collection it's called the Singles Collection 91 to 2011. So you can find it. It's just not You can't hear it in the record.
I wonder if that's why it was taken out. Because sometimes when things are in compilations, they're missing because Spotify is stupid. Or compilations are incomplete because the songs are in the album and they like blank them out in the compilation.
Usually they'll gray them though,
Right.
Right. You'll see the listing and it'll just be grayed out so you can't play it.
True.
This is just absent.
I don't know.
Weird. I don't think we've seen that one before. We've seen some weird stuff. I don't know that we've seen that before.
We've seen some weird stuff. I am shocked that they have a single with 47 million spins.
Which one's that?
What single's that?
Anemone. It's their most popular song has 47 million spins.
Oh, weird.
I wonder if that was on
a TV show or something.
I don't know.
Straight Up or Down was the one that's the Boardwalk Empire intro.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
That is 6.8. That's like, and then Van Handi Madem is 10 million. I don't know. That's not a language I speak. But they got some spins. He's probably made a couple bucks. Good 10 or 12 bucks off the Spotify with those 47 million.
Sitars aren't going to buy themselves.
No, they will not. Got to get them imported now. And all the supply chain issues. It's going to take a while.
Nice.
Jeff, thank you for bringing this album to us.
Thanks.
I'm glad we got to talk about this band.
I'm real glad too. And it's interesting, like going through like the picks, for whatever it's worth. If I can indulge for 30 seconds.
Yep.
The ones that a lot of the episodes that are interesting for me are ones where I only listen to a few tracks of the album and then like I haven't thought about the rest of the album in 25 plus years. You guys go back and review something. I'm like, oh, I've been ignoring good tracks, right? Like it's like a personal journey to figure out if stuff goes from an EP to a worthy album for me after a couple decades go by, and I'm no longer relying on my the opinion I had when I was 15. And I was thinking about trying to introduce a few of those to my pick, but then I was just like, what, I'd rather than making an interesting episode or try to find one where Jay and Tim are going to disagree and it's interesting, I just decided like, what, I want to try to bring some joy. This is a band I love. And
sure.
If a few people listen to it and say, what, I should get into it, and they end up feeling the same way, I think that will be where I can do the most good through my pick.
Excellent. Well, I like when we get to bands that are in the consciousness of the 90s, but they're not like big, but they're known.
Yeah. And
I haven't really spent a lot of time with them. Jay hasn't spent a lot of time with them. So I like getting exposed to stuff that was in the ether, but we just didn't spend enough time or just didn't have enough time to get to everything. I was too busy listening to
with all the trips to Bed Bath & Beyond and Home Depot, we just didn't have time.
We just didn't have time, right? Who has the time? But thank you. And if anybody picks an album that has a Jim Jones audio quote coming up, I am going to instill a ban on Jim Jones for 2022 because I've got my fill. I went down a wiki hole reading about it because I didn't have all the details, and that's how I found out about the Flavor Aid versus the Kool-Aid. All kinds of stuff. And apparently there's talks of Leonardo DiCaprio playing in a movie based on his life.
Oh, jeez.
So that can't be good.
If Charles Manson gets this kind of run too, this is Jim Jones is like a B version of him. So in terms of the pop consciousness, so
right,
a matter of time.
Who's going to play Charlie Manson? Oscar Isaac, maybe? I don't know.
Vincent Gallo? Could he pull that off?
You're taking me back to the time we spent trying to cast the G.I. Joe movie a decade before they ever made a G.I. Joe movie.
That's right. That's what we drove around in the van trying to,
whatever, the early 2000s. We're like, what would be badass if they made a G.I. Joe movie? And then we started like riffing on how to cast all the 80s G.I. Joe characters.
Mm-hmm.
And then they ended up making the movie, and it was like such a letdown.
Yes. It's like
everything. Take our casting advice.
Nope. We had Paul Newman in that thing. I mean, it was gonna be badass.
I mean, our budget was, A little nuts.
It was a lot on talent. I'm not gonna lie. Yeah, but I think we did a good job. I've got to have that in a notebook somewhere. I'll have to go dig that out because I'm pretty sure that casting list was bonkers because we paid no attention to if anybody would be interested in actually doing it. Or I think we had Catherine Zeta-Jones as Baroness.
I think you're right. Yeah.
I mean, come on. They got some nobody to play Baroness.
It might have been before Chicago, so you probably could have got her a little cheaper.
That's true. It's true. Jeff, thank you again.
Thanks, guys.
I want to thank our patrons who support us every month, like Jeff. We greatly appreciate it. It helps us pay our bills. We have 560 something episodes in the archive, and to keep those percolating for people to download, we got to keep that server fed with cash. That's how it works. You got to feed the meter every month. And so actually we do it on a yearly basis. It's a little bit cheaper than doing it month to month. But want to remind folks that you can support us by going to the DMO Union .com website or digmeoutunion.com. It takes you to Patreon. You join us there, become a union member. One of the A's, I don't want to say her name, but one of the A's is talking in my house. Alexa is randomly talking. Scary. Nobody's in that room, and she just started talking. And I have humanized her by calling her. Does everybody do that? Because of the name. I should probably change the name to like Sven or something. Can you do that? Can you change the names of your? I don't know.
I don't think so.
Damn.
You're stuck with her
until they take over. So digmeoutunion.com. That's where you go. Support the podcast. It's also where you can read the box newsletter every week. 2 new reviews of new releases from the 80s and 90s relevant bands that we cover, movies, books, and music. You can also go to digmeoutpodcast.com to sign up for the newsletter. It's also where you can suggest an album, which people at Patreon get to vote on every month, an album for us to review. And then lastly, if you like what you heard, Apple Podcasts is the place to go to leave a positive review to stroke our massive egos. So for Jay, I'm Tim. We're out. We'll be back next week with another episode. Dig me out.